Sweden hose.
Well, she's actually Hungarian. My friend said, like, why are you going to Sweden
Um,
to meet a Hungarian woman? It's like, at least you could meet a Swedish woman, but whatever. That's how it worked out. So I kind of saw the virus situation in Sweden as well, where no one wears a mask, kids were at school the whole time, stuff like that.
oh, because they're the ones who are like going for herd immunity, and they're just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
washing their hands basically.
Right, yeah, yeah. I mean, they shut the universities and schools for older children, and people didn't go to work the same way, and they were more careful.
Mm-hmm.
They had guidelines, but they didn't enforce them.
In
Or
Sweden,
they
huh?
had like smaller events, less than 100 people. No.
Yeah, well, I guess we should just get started since we're already recording and all that stuff, and it just went live on YouTube. So, welcome to Daily Archetype. I'm
Hello
here
there.
with Adrian Courage, and I wanted to ask you, is that your real name?
It is my real name. Yeah, yeah.
Really?
People who don't
What?
know me
Yeah, because
think it's.
was that a hard thing to live up to growing up and having to show yourself courageous and not cowardly?
I never did up to it when I was a kid,
You
but
didn't live up to it.
not really.
Okay.
No, I'm much more into living up to it now. I've
Okay.
kind of grown into it, so to speak.
Okay. So,
Been to the UK. There's a famous brewery
mhm.
called Courage Beer. That's also our family.
Oh wow.
Started by my great grandfather, like or great great grandfather, 1789, I think.
Wow.
But like most breweries, it got sold off to
Wow.
big
You should.
chickens.
You should. I can imagine you on like the doing an ad for it. Courage Brewery. It sold off
If you
100
go on
years ago.
YouTube, they have incredibly sexist videos, like ads from the 70s and 80s.
Incredibly
Pretty fun.
sexy. All right.
Yeah. Like wow,
Wow.
of
Okay.
guys coming home from work, drinking in the pub, and then being chased home by their frumpy wives.
They're frumpy wives.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly. And this is like, hey, we have our right to drink beer.
we have our right. Don't take our last right away. We're gonna have our courage beer.
So it's not a proud moment in our family history, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, proud in some ways and shameful in other ways, I suppose.
But no, it had nothing to do with our family by that stage, but it was the name.
Oh, just the
Sorry.
name, yeah. Well, I guess we have that sort of in common because I'm the Miller, so in America, it's all about the Miller time. So with Miller Genuine Draft. So we're
Yeah,
like we're like the Beer Brothers.
I hadn't
uh,
thought of that.
yeah. So anyway, you have had a lot of interesting things going on in your life, and
I have.
we've been talking about doing an official podcast for a little while and finally got the chance to. We did a couple of these live streams when it wasn't an official podcast and talked for several hours. Those are still available on YouTube. But today, I think we're just going to talk about herd denial, which was an idea that you had on your mind lately,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
just what's going on in the world. And yeah, so what's going on? And by the way, what I was wondering how this would work because you're in Budapest, Hungary now,
Yes.
and you know what I've noticed doing the more of these Zoom calls is people who seem to be in, I don't know, more of the mainland, that part of Europe. There's almost no delay that I can tell on these calls. But if they're more in like the British area, England or Ireland, then there's like almost a 1 second delay. And I don't know if that's because they use the cables that go up to Greenland before they go down to the United States, or what the difference is. But yeah, you do
I
good. There's
just had
almost no delay.
I just had fiber installed, and
Oh,
um, also we have the mobile network's really good here. So we spoke on the mobile network last time,
yeah. Well, it was
and
good last time
that's really good.
too.
But in the
Um,
UK, the internet It's terrible, I have to say.
Yeah.
People don't make calls anymore because the calls get dropped.
Wow. Right.
Everyone's just texting because it's so bad.
Wow.
So I'm not surprised in the UK if you had problems with like that.
Yeah, yeah, but with mainlander Europeans, it seems to work really well, which is important because sometimes I talk to uh people in the UK and I have to like say something and then wait, you got it, respond. It's
Right, and you're interrupting all the time.
yeah, it's tricky with
Like,
that delay. It makes a big difference. But yeah, there's like no delay. And then you said you're interested in possibly starting some of your own kind of podcast type thing in the next few weeks.
well, I'm writing a book at the moment, and the
Yeah,
book is about. It's a kind of personal journey, a bit like my version of the Red Book, more
mm,
in real life situations, much more pop culture.
mm,
I think I sometimes think if Jung um, wrote today
mm.
because of the internet and because of
Right.
dating and Tinder and big
Yeah,
cities and you know pop culture.
billions
Uh,
more people.
yeah, well, everyone's seen Star Wars. Everyone's
Yeah,
knows these music videos or whatever,
right.
and they all have a kind of secrets of psychology
Mm-hmm.
coded into them, archetypal stuff. So
Yeah, and that's kind of the result of Jung, really. Well, at least that
partly,
we
yeah,
at least the him through him and Joseph Campbell and George Lucas that we're able to get it to where we can see all that in just like a 2-hour movie or on a show or even a music video. Because before that it was like spread out over these anthologies of books and oral traditions and everything else, these archetypal heroes journeys and everything else. And now in the modern world, we can squish it into Star Wars or The Matrix or, these
exactly,
things. Yeah.
that everyone's seen, whereas maybe not everyone's read. I don't know, Dostoevsky or
Right.
Shakespeare or whatever else. I mean, it's all in. You see the the point really of the book is through my own journey, I see these patterns of,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, patterns of reality or
Mm-hmm.
patterns of truth
Mm-hmm.
or patterns of psychology
Mm-hmm.
kind of emerging and combining and appearing on different levels. So
Mm-hmm.
you might have a relationship with your wife,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, and it might reflect the relationship of the Democrats and the Republicans, let's say, or something like this. It's
Yeah, the right and left.
Uh, same kind of patterns appear and interwoven, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then you see, I don't know, the hero journey of Luke Skywalker, and you think, well, okay, or Adrian Courage,
Yeah.
what is my hero journey, which is
Right.
obviously the point of the Joseph Campbell
Right. Or just
narrative.
the main thing, I guess, is the coming to consciousness of the individual versus giving that up to the herd or the masses, which is partly what we're going to talk about today. Is how
Right. Yeah.
in current events the masses want to think and believe and say certain things that are contrary to reality, and they've kind of gotten themselves in this sort of, I don't know if you'd call it a negative feedback loop where, and just like you're just saying, it can get into just like if you have a argument with your wife or girlfriend or your or even a close friend, and you do something wrong, sometimes it's hard to go back and just consciously be like, I'm sorry, I did that wrong, let's consciously make it right. And instead people want to just like either deny it like it never happened, or at best they will never say anything about it, but maybe be nice for a little while or try to do some nice thing and just act like it's normal. And that's kind of like what's going on in the
But
nations and the globe.
right, but those things will be abstracted, right? So
Mm.
if you offend someone
Hmm.
and then I don't know, you buy them a beer,
Yeah.
you might think that makes up for it, what you've said to offend them,
Yeah, but
but
it actually
they might
buries
not
it in the
they
unconscious.
they might not let go of it. Might
Mm.
in a week's time
Right.
Forgotten about your generous gesture of buying them a beer,
Right.
and they will be back in remembering the incident, and maybe
Mm.
these things can kind of mount up, and you get into a, yeah, as you said, I think you said feedback loop, right?
Yeah, or
Of
negative feedback loop.
yeah, of this yeah, what we're having now is
Mm.
fear
Right,
being a
right, right,
virtue,
right.
whereas in the traditional fairy tale kind of scenarios,
Courage was the
or
virtue.
courage was the virtue, and the dragon was, or the serpent,
Right.
or or whatever had to be confronted and overcome. We talk about Harry Potter as well,
Mm.
and and we've reached a point really where fear has become the virtue. So
Right.
if you're not afraid enough of the virus, let's
Yeah.
say, or
And not
then
only
you're
not
not doing.
afraid, but also promoting infinitely more fear. You have to not only be afraid, it's not just enough to like be hiding out in a house alone with a mask on constantly and taking pictures of yourself alone in the house with a mask on so everybody knows you're hiding in fear, but you have to also be telling everybody else to do that too.
So you asked, you know, my name is Courage, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but it seems to have really gone out of fashion. And
yeah,
this is
yeah.
the idea of Nietzsche's Übermensch.
Mm,
I think we talked about that before, and or you could talk about heroism, and that's
yeah,
really
yeah.
obviously comes to the fore in lots of stories and lots of
Mm,
myths. Uh, but the anti-hero or the antichrist
mm,
is seems to be very prevalent right now, and
right.
difficult to know what to do about it.
Well, it's
Whether
like,
whatever you think about the science of the virus, I don't think we should get into that. But
well, yeah. Well, courage initially starts out as, or it can, depending on the situation. But before we've become wise at the situation, it starts off as foolishness by necessity. So, and that's a lot of why, what's his name? Carl Jung talked a lot about how, uh, you know, the fool is the precursor to the savior. And the reason is because when you're going where no man has gone before, no person has gone before, it's a courageous act, but because it's really never happened before, it's really kind of foolish. So you can, it can seem wise to be fearful and just stay in your bunker or whatever, but at some point you've got to get out and confront the dragon. So it's like there has to be a balance. You know, you can't be totally foolishly courageous, but you have to at some point be a little bit foolishly courageous, and you can't be totally uh just purely courageous. I mean, or everybody would just die. It's like I have the
you
courage
don't
to
know.
do.
You don't know whether you're being courageous or not. You
Right.
never know.
Well, and what happens
So
too, it's almost like how a baby or an individual human develops consciousness. Like if you look at 2-year-olds, they go out and they just like get into stuff. And that's how it is as we go through the stages of life. Like if you look at uh young teenagers or adults, they're just like they want to like, they're just curious about each other's bodies and stuff. And so it's like when you're young, you just kind of go
they
out and you're,
rebel. They
yeah,
rebel
you
without a cause, without a reason to rebel. You know,
yeah, yeah, you just
they
rebel for the sake of rebelling, and you try to get sexual just for the sake of doing so, even though that might be a little ill-advised sometimes. Um,
oh, sorry.
but you're just making that, and what you're doing is it's like, again, with the 2-year-old example, they'll like, if they're playing around with you as a like 2 or 3-year-old, they will bite and punch and do all these silly things that are kind of like you you hope that they grow out of, because they're trying everything, and which is kind of, foolish, you could say, and courageous. But eventually you're just like, don't do that, and this is okay and this is not okay. And so
But
they learn by just trying
at
everything.
first you laugh. At first you laugh, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When when a kid comes and punches you, you're like, "No, that's a bad move. You can see I'm bigger than you, right?" And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they know that because you're bigger than them,
Right, right,
that's why you won't hit back, right?
right, right.
So, um, yeah, right. And that's a slightly, yeah, a different idea, but I guess what they're trying to establish is the limits of
Right.
what is play. What is play? How
Well,
what are the limits to it?
and with play, it's almost like finding where courageousness transfers from foolishness to wisdom because you eventually just try out a bunch of things. It's almost like this pandemic that we're trying to get out of now. Um, yeah, and probably March, April, we need to be really cautious because we didn't know if it was going to be really super deadly. But at a certain point, we figured out, okay, yeah, it does have a certain mortality rate of like uh
Yeah,
0.5% or whatever.
but
uh
what I've noticed people saying
mm,
is that they use the argument of ignorance to
mm.
justify their fear. You know, they'll say, "We didn't know that. We couldn't have known that. We don't know that." You
Well,
know, as an
yeah,
argument.
well, what I was saying
Uh,
too is that was back in March and April, but by the time it's like June, July, and now we're in August, September, October, it's like, okay, we know now that the mortality rate is not much different than the cold or flu. And so yeah, be careful, maybe wash hands more or whatever, like we always should do, but we don't need to shut down the whole world. So
so
maybe shut
so
down
we
the world for April, but not for the whole whole year.
so I guess what we've seen is because it's the whole world's affected, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we've seen this kind of. I'm very conscious of it because I went to Sweden,
Uh-huh.
family and friends in the UK. I
Mm,
live in Hungary. I also have friends in Germany. So and obviously in the States too.
mm-hmm,
And you see these kind of psychological
mm-hmm.
waves going through the population.
Right, right.
So initially, like this initial panic phase,
Mm-hmm.
and then a kind of frenzied
Yeah.
action. You know, all the toilet paper stuff
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and stock up. You need, what happens if you're ill for 2 weeks, 2 months
Yeah.
in quarantine, and you can't see anyone. You're going to need enough food. So everyone was like preparing for war or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of, but people forget this, right? Because it's all happened. It's
Yeah.
all been and gone, right? And then you had this kind of lockdown where no one went out in the street whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know? Crazy to think back. And then that slowly came, but then I think everyone reached the point that this is never going to end, right? Around April,
Yeah.
May, that like the new normal, and our lives will never be the same, and we'll never see our friends again,
Yeah.
kind of thing. and then, uh, and then here anyway, they opened up, and summer was quite normal. I
Mm-hmm.
think people went to the beach, stuff like this. But you see this process. So the government opened up bars and pubs and everything, and restaurants, and people were outside and mixing, and there were concerts and stuff even.
Mm-hmm.
And people, because the government had said, it's over, people acted like it was totally over.
Yeah.
Their psychology just into
Yeah.
complete and
It's
utter
like
abject fear.
letting out the repression.
And they talk about it if the virus has changed, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing has changed.
Well, we've
Only
developed an
people's psych.
immunity. We've probably developed a bit of an immunity is the only thing that has changed physically.
Yeah, but people at this point aren't talking about that
Yeah.
we might have some immunity, right?
Yeah, yeah. They only
So
want to talk
it
about
seems
fear.
it seems natural that some immunity will have developed this
Yeah.
period, but but the psychology has again turned back into this kind of virtue, fear as virtue,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to talk to people when they have that attitude that the
Mhm.
more afraid they are, the better people that they are.
Yeah,
You know,
and I
for the
get
for
this
the
general
collective good.
yeah, I get this general feeling that like a lot of people are over it, but the general feeling is,
They don't want to admit it.
well, some do and some don't, but it's like we have to deal with the crazy fear stuff until after the election. Just because they know that the media is going to be pushing the buttons of the herd and the dummies, or the impressionable people, at least until after the election. So
And you don't want to get into an argument with those people because they will accuse you of, being reckless and
yeah,
being foolish.
grandma killers and Trump supporters and
Right.
racist and white supremacists. And yeah, like that's the hardest thing, is if you're white, you have to be really careful because that's like, oh, well, you must be a racist or a white supremacist because the disease is deadlier to minorities and you're not a minority, so you just want to kill minorities, right?
Yeah, and there's this strange linking of different issues
Hmm.
together, right?
Right, right.
As you said, like the race issue has been mingled in with COVID,
Yeah,
and I've seen it mingled in with, women suffer more because of, they have to stay at home with the kids, or
yeah, yeah,
uh, you know, so the COVID is unfair on children,
yeah,
on mothers,
yeah.
and
Only
and COVID
only white
COVID is not
males get
just.
off. Yeah, it's only
So
white males, cisgender white males, that are getting off. Everybody else is
well,
suffering.
it's an expectation that the virus should treat fairly. Like I've even
Yeah,
seen this idea that you shouldn't discriminate against old people. Like I've seen this. The argument is people make the argument that uh, elderly people are most vulnerable and they should be isolated.
yeah,
And I've actually seen this argument where people have said it's not fair that the old people should be isolated. Everyone should be isolated because that's
yeah,
discriminatory to. And I think there's such a now that people don't even realize that they're saying these kind of things.
yeah.
Like, why should we isolate the old people? That's so cruel and mean on the old people. It would be better to isolate everyone. Why
Yeah,
is that better?
yeah. So, what can we put our finger on as far as what's going on psychologically? Since that's kind of what we talk about here, and what we had in mind is, um, eh, well, one, originally what was going on, and then now we're getting to like a new level of, like you're saying, just kind of like a herd denial. So, what is it that's going on in the world, mentally and unconsciously?
Well, I think people have a very bad sense of proportion or perspective
Mm,
of of risk. Let's say,
mm-hmm,
so you can compare levels of risk,
right,
and you can compare the level of risk of driving down the motorway or
right,
highway into whatever, uh, and your likelihood of dying
yeah,
from that, uh, and your likelihood of dying of COVID or in a
cold or flu or
yeah,
just getting out of
whatever,
bed.
anything, right? You can helicopter or aeroplane or
Yeah.
whatever, and people have no, or a snake, let's say,
Mm,
and emotions have become so uh, prevalent or predominant
right.
in people's thinking that it doesn't matter really the odds or the risk or the probabilities of a certain thing
Mm,
happening. Uh, Uncertainty in itself is,
right.
I guess, the danger, right? People can't deal with the uncertainty,
Right.
and so they essentially shut themselves down and lock down
Mhm.
take a very position against uncertainty, because we've, for a long time now, we've been living in a world essentially without uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing, that you could have a job, you could earn your money,
Hmm.
you could have your friends, kids go to school, you get health care, and you expect to live till you're 90 or whatever, and there is no uncertainty.
Well,
The
and
the smallest bit of uncertainty can cause a great amount of distress to people.
yeah, there was that, but also the strange thing along those lines that's going on, very different than our, multi-million year history, is death was always the norm until now. Like it was
Yeah,
always the norm that anybody could die any day and anybody could get, you know, totally massively sick at any day. And that was just completely the norm. And so now it's like, I don't know if that people think that this is some kind of a strange utopia slash hell at the same time, where we've gotten ourselves to a world where at least in America, the median death age is 78, which is also the median death age for COVID, by the way.
yeah,
But so we're in this world where basically the odds are you're going to die of old age, just about everybody. And it's hard to not die of old age because uh
and
anytime
then
anybody gets, go
as a
ahead.
result, it's almost like death has become politically incorrect. Like any kind of negative emotion has now become
Yeah.
politically incorrect.
Yeah, it's
So
something more than politically incorrect though. It's like a taboo to say that somebody
taboo.
could, yeah, to say that somebody could die uh before they're 100 is just, and that's somehow life and normal and a part and just a part of being, then you're just uh the enemy, if you even speak that or think
but
that.
but but yeah, I mean, but I came to realize uh, this was a projection
Yeah.
of people's fear of death, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so they have a fear of, at any age,
Hmm.
right? Whereas, I met an old guy a few weeks last week, I think, and we got off the bus. I just met
Hmm.
him on the bus, and we started chatting, and he knew all the great Hungarian scientists personally.
Hmm.
And
Oh.
then it turned out the same direction, and he said, "Let's run home." He was 82 years old.
82.
Yeah, yeah, and I could hardly keep up with him, and we jogged
Yeah.
back.
Wow.
And he said he's quite happy now to die. He hasn't got long left.
Mm.
He's got a few things to take care of. You know,
Mm.
he's not quite ready yet, but he had the sparkle in his eye, and he talked about dying, and it was um, not an issue for Paul, because
Mm.
he'd had a good life. He said it had been a good ride, but
Well,
he could still run, I guess. So
right.
that
You know what that makes me think though is that on an individual level, if you talk to any individual, regardless of their age,
right,
they have something of an acceptance of their mortality on at least some level. But
right,
I think it's not the any individual, whether it's someone our age or younger, or like the 82-year-old guy. I mean, they may have some death aversion or fear of that unknown or whatever, but I think it all happens in the herd and the masses. So, in other words, I can be like, yeah, well, I'd rather not die now, or maybe I want to die now, or maybe I want to die in 40 years or whatever, or I want to see Haley's Comet or whatever. Uh, but if I say that that's okay for anybody else to ever die, then I'm somehow the worst enemy in the world. So it seems like it all
right.
happens in the herd and the masses, and almost not at all on the individual level.
Now you think so? I think that people project their fear of dying onto society. So they think that no one else should talk about it, and they think it's really insensitive for anyone to talk about death because they don't want to hear that talk of death, and they say don't talk about it.
Right.
You shouldn't talk about it, and
Well,
it's insensitive because
it's
they hate it. They
well, it's
hate the
weird
thought of
because
their own
it's
mortality.
we should be able to talk through it on whatever level, but it is on the individual level, we can work through it, and we should be able to work through it at least in some kind of groups, whether they're religious groups or whatever, I don't know, or even psychological, whatever. Uh, but it's like, yeah, on so I guess an individual might have a fear of the unknown that happens after death. Which I don't know. That's just my personal language because nobody really
Mm.
knows what death is. So to me, I don't think anybody can really even say they have a fear of death because you don't really know what death is on a conscious level. Nobody does, and probably ever
I
will. At
did
least,
have a I did have a kind of transcendental experience with death. I was
oh,
at a funeral and I
mm,
saw it was a really nice funeral. It was an old.
mm,
She wasn't that old, actually, 72,
mm,
and she said she had cancer, and she told her family, "I don't want treatment. I'm ready to go,
mm,
and see you on the other side." And that she told that to all her grandchildren and everything.
mm,
She had another grandchild that was born the following week,
mm,
and but she said this is the way it's meant to be, and
mm,
she was one of my mother's best friends. So I
mm,
was there at the funeral, a small family thing, and I could see her. I could sense her energy
mm,
in the chapel, in the church.
mm,
I could sense that her children were sad, obviously,
mm.
but then when they looked at each other, they smiled. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
they saw their mother in each other, and they
All right.
kind of took on her, her spirit, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Living on
and the
in a.
interesting thing was behind the altar, I saw
Mm,
they had three images of Christ
mm,
carrying the,
mm,
and I really in that moment I really felt if I carry my cross,
mm.
it's going to be all right,
Yeah. Yeah.
because somehow
Mm,
your funeral will be that event where
mm,
people will say he carried his cross, or
yeah.
you know he lives on in us. He gave us something that we could never um, get. That we wouldn't be here without him, or something like this.
Yeah. I guess in a way, it's almost like death, even in the conscious world, like almost like that you mentioned, a living on just as a memory. Even it's like the ultimate final exam that could happen at any time. So it's like the ultimate test where like anybody could go at any moment, whether it's for any reason, and then at that moment it's weird because then you know what that person's really was made of, because it's like in that funeral that you mentioned, and probably other conversations that happen at that time is people reflect and they figure out, okay, this was a really good person, and it inspires me to do better in my own life and all that. um,
But a
so
bit more than that, I think. But I think it's the idea that that person has
mm,
been relieved from life. Yeah,
the burden of life, yeah.
the burden of life. They've been they've, they've kind of um, done what they could, right? Or they've
Mm,
added value in
yeah,
some way.
yeah.
It's a business term, but
Well, hopefully.
you can't. I mean, what it means is that person cannot do any more bad,
Right.
and all that lives on of them is the memory, I guess.
Yeah, and
The
hopefully it's good, because I mean, there are some people where it's like people wish they were dead. Like that was the big joke last week with Trump getting COVID. It's like a lot of liberals are. tweeting certain things like, I hope he dies or whatever. And
It's not a good look, is it?
yeah. And it's the whole thing that, so I think what people are really afraid of with death then is the known aspect is it's like the ultimate test and you don't know how ready you are for that ultimate test.
Right.
because
Yeah.
because your sort of essence, spirit, or whatever, it's in all those other people, like that funeral experience that you mentioned. Because you can't like go around and take a survey to your 10 or 20 closest friends or family members or whatever and be like, hey, what if my funeral happened, would you say this or think this? Because they can't really even fathom that unless it actually happened.
Right.
So it's like the ultimate test that nobody really knows how to. So all you can do is try to do your best to make sure that if you're hated for the right reasons, and if you're loved for the right reasons, and you do your best and you carry on. But you never know when that sort of final exam is going to come. And that's, I think, a lot of what the real fear is because that's a heavy burden, to live up to that you don't know if you're going to have uh people that are glad you went, or probably not, but that might be a fear or insecurity that people have, however consciously or
Well, why?
unconsciously.
Well, exactly. But why do you say probably not? Why do you say that? Because
Oh,
you know
well,
you're
so
Isaac, man.
oh yeah, well, no, but I mean, I think
Look what you're
usually,
doing.
yeah, I think usually, even so like even if Trump actually died, for example, there might be some people that would come out and say, yeah, I'm glad he did, woohoo, look at this, look at that. But of course, even those people who think that he's the devil incarnate or whatever, uh would kind of be
Well,
like,
they will
well,
realize quickly that it didn't solve anything. The death of Trump
yeah, well, and
solve anything.
same thing with, and this is like a common motif in uh hero stories and things, is you don't want to actually uh kill the villain necessarily, because that makes you the villain, or you don't want to wish the villain to die necessarily.
Hmm.
You want
Hmm.
to somehow uh, change the world by changing yourself. And so ideally, so you'd hope that when a person dies, there's not a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm glad that person died. And usually that's how it goes. People die, unfortunately, and then those around them, even if they didn't like
Create a
them,
myth. Create a myth around the person.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if they, and then it's weird because, so like, let's say there's a person who was a really bad father and he dies, and then the children, a lot of the children are happy about that, but because they're happy about that, that makes them into uh bitter, horrible
Got to have
people.
a guilty sense of guilt about it. But
Yeah.
I've had my assistant's husband said,
Mm,
oh, his mother died, and he was
mm,
very upset, obviously.
mm,
But he said for the first time when his mother died, he felt like an adult. And
mm.
he's
Yeah,
he's
that's
nearly
common.
six. He's nearly 60.
Right.
50. I don't know, late 50s, I think, or
And see,
maybe
that
I don't know how old he is.
that's like a
But
dual thing
this,
that's going on is, okay, when a person dies, whether they are whatever age, young, old, or in the middle, uh, it then forces those around them to kind of grow up. And that always happens to some degree, whether it's a parent or a brother or whoever, then those around them have to mature. And then what happens that's tricky is, yeah, it's like the guy you mentioned, he's 60 and now he feels like he's grown up finally. But then a lot of times somebody will have their parents die and they might be in their 20s, 30s, whatever. And it's like, oh my God, now I have to, yeah, now I have to be grown up, and I didn't want to grow up yet, when I'm a teenager, 20 years old, or whatever. But it's better to grow up quicker. It just sucks in some ways, compared to growing up when you're 60.
right. And this happens all the time,
Yeah.
and you hear stories. You know, if you actually talk to people at individual level,
Hmm.
you know, everyone's had friends die.
Right.
Uh, I'm actually quite lucky that I haven't so much, but
Right.
you know, parents, uh, siblings, cousins, you know, tragedy. And I mean, I
Hmm.
know Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot,
Right.
um, but it's kind of inevitable. But people, because we live in this kind of globalized fantasy
Hmm.
movie world, like
Yeah.
news
Drama.
cycle world,
Yeah.
where where the news of someone dying,
Hmm.
maybe this is a new idea, the news of someone dying has to be like David Bowie or Prince or,
Yeah.
you know, someone famous.
Uh-huh.
And then everyone's like, oh, what a terrible shame. Such and such died,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah.
How
But
old were they? How expected was it? Yeah.
yeah, I remember there was that year, was it 2016, where it's
Mm.
every week someone was dying?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Some
there's been a
famous
few this year.
person, a rock star. Of course, right?
Well, although this year, I can't think of any famous COVID deaths. Although I think what's his name, Herman Cain was just some like you probably haven't even really heard of him, other than maybe when
The
he ran.
designer who died this week.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, of COVID though. Did he die of COVID?
yeah, he died of COVID, apparently.
Okay, yeah, because that's and I think that's why a lot of people are starting to get skeptical of COVID. It's like, yeah, we can see the statistics and everything, and however that we may or may not trust them, but and we may know a lot of people that have had, cases or symptoms or whatever, but as many people as are supposedly supposed to be dying of it, and as much as we're supposed to be afraid of it,
You don't
only
know anyone, right? You
yeah,
barely know
nobody
anyone.
knows anybody who has died, or if they did, it was always somebody that was like ready to go anyway.
Mhm.
They were like at least.
I did hear of one guy, he had a bad tooth infection. He caught COVID and he died. He had, I don't know, like really bad
Mm,
dental problem. And
yeah, I mean,
COVID finished him off. But that's really like a Darwin Award to go out with.
well, yeah, I mean, because the whole thing with COVID is you
He's
can't
like
die with
42,
it.
I think.
Yeah, you can't die with it unless it causes a lung infection. So you have to have some other things that would lead to that chain reaction.
Yeah,
So
but back on topic, kind of
yeah, yeah.
the idea of you know, when a famous person dies, it's like a tragedy and a
Mm,
but also a celebration. Everyone, you know, when Michael Jackson died, everyone started listening to Michael Jackson or David Bowie.
mm,
It's kind of like then you have a retrospective of that person's like music career, and
right.
everyone listens back, right? But if your grandmother dies, you know,
Uh-huh.
there's no reliable, good document of her life, and
Yeah.
you've kind of maybe you didn't spend time with your grandmother, didn't talk to her,
Yeah.
didn't find out about her experiences in her life, and
See, and this is another
it's kind
aspect.
of regrettable.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of dealing with mortality that people often don't want to face is like when maybe our parents are in their uh, 60s or whatever, and they might have diseases, and it might be like, oh, we got to go start talking to our parents more because they could go at any time, whether they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, or whatever, whether they're parents or even grandparents. And we're like, oh yeah, I'll do that tomorrow or next week, next year. And then
And then we
so
feel guilty about that,
yeah,
you know, feel guilty about all that's lost.
all that's lost and all that, and like, yeah, and even yeah, when like all my grandparents are gone now, and it's like, yeah, I just wish I got to know more about that generation and spent more time, and all those things. But then while they're here at whoever it is, whether it's them or parents or whoever else, it's another aspect of the mortality that we have this weird relationship with, that it's like a responsibility sort of that we know we need to deal with, but we don't want to. And one of those things that it's like there's some things that you can kind of get away with procrastinating a bit, because if you do it on one particular day compared to a week or a year later, it doesn't make a huge difference. But then there's other things where it's like,
Right.
oh, now time's up. And so that's another aspect of mortality that we hate to deal with. And all this COVID stuff is just making people have to deal with that, and they just don't want to, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to have any kind of an intelligent conversation or a rational conversation or anything. They just want to be like, we're really upset, so we'll be in fear and burn everything
Right.
down and blame somebody.
We had a big argument here with my friends and I, because Urban Victor said that it was a kind of misstep what he said, but he said we're going to cure everyone who gets COVID, and basically, you know, what he meant to say was we're going to give the best treatment possible we can. You know? But he just, as a politician, he said we're going to cure everyone,
right?
And and my friends were saying, well, you can't really say that, because you can't promise. You can't promise no one's going to die.
Right.
And there was an argument, because some people said, yeah, but he's a politician. What he has to promise, right? He has to promise utopia, because that's what everyone's promising. And we've got into this idea that the governments and politicians have to promise utopia, even though everyone knows that it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. And they're saying it's not because of them that they don't feel that they need to hear it, but the rest of the population needs to hear about this utopia, because that's why they will vote for this guy. And it's a total loss of reality.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you see that with the stuff that Trump's saying. You know, Trump is saying whatever springs to mind.
Yeah.
Because he's just riffing off what the other side is saying, which doesn't make sense either. You know.
Right.
If so, he said something like, you can't. If you have more testing, you have more cases.
Yeah.
Which is true. Or no, he said if you have more tests, then you have more infections. I think he said that.
More what?
More infections.
Oh. Yeah.
But that's obviously not true, right?
Right. Yeah. It's cases is true.
Because cases, but he didn't say that. He said infections. But obviously that's not true.
Yeah.
But really, the joke he's making is against the other side, who said if we test less, there'll be fewer cases. You know, you know what I mean? So if we pretend it isn't there, or what he's pointing out is if we didn't, then we wouldn't even be aware of the virus, right? That's a logical opposite to that.
Right.
The more tests, the more infections.
And what both sides are doing in the whole political thing, which just sucks that all this has to happen in such a political year, is and happens on the local level, state level, federal level, and internationally and everything, is it's not even about like, here's the best option, here's the best idea, here's the best science, here's the best most rational conversation, whatever. It's just about the other side wants to kill people. No, your side wants to kill more people. No, your side wants to kill more people. And it's like, nobody wants to kill people. We're just trying to find ways to
and then the only response to that is to say we're not going to kill anyone.
That's where it leads, which is a complete loss of reality, but it's the only way to go in these, you know, political cat and mouse games, just chasing each other around and be like, no, you're gonna kill more people, no you are, and then
no one's gonna die.
No one's gonna die. We're all gonna live forever.
It becomes an absolute joke. There's a joke party here. I think I told you about this. their campaign slogan. They're called the Two Dog Party,
Okay.
and
The
and
Tooth
their
and Dog
slogan
Party.
is Two-Tailed Dog
Oh yeah.
Party.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why they called that, but their slogan is "Free beer, eternal life."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's their campaign slogan. So anyway.
Yeah, I think I told you that's like Vermin Supreme, who we have here that runs every year, at least in New Hampshire, and he
Yeah,
promises a free pony for everyone. So
yeah, right, yeah, yeah.
we yeah,
So
but go ahead.
well, going back, I think
Yeah.
that if you can promise the utopia, whereas everyone is afraid.
Hmm.
So if you listen to us, if you behave yourselves,
Hmm.
then everything will be perfect.
Hmm.
And what's happening, I'm seeing, and I think everywhere, is a lack of agency. Like
Hmm.
people don't have any of their own, take any responsibility really for their own
Right.
lives, really.
Yeah. Well, it's
And
because
and then and then you get back to the idea of where are the heroes?
yeah, it's almost like it makes me think of how Jordan Peterson has this. I don't know what it is, rule 4 or one of the rules he talks about a lot, which is take care of yourself like you would take care of someone that you're responsible for, like you would take care of a pet, or take
Yeah,
care of, maybe if you had to take care of your uh, grandparents or your elderly parents or something like that. Because usually people put a lot of responsibility and care into that once they might have to do that or get to do that. But then when they have to deal with themselves, for some reason it works the opposite, where they don't always take good care of themselves. Although it's weird because the part of the reason for that is because if you don't take good care of yourself, you let yourself off the hook from a lot of work. But on the other hand, if you take really good care of yourself, you can kind of appear egotistical in a way, or something like that. So it's like this weird self-care paradox that is hard to get over, and that's the only way to deal with it, is to say care for yourself like you would care for someone you're responsible for. But to what you were saying a second ago, it's almost like people project that onto the group, that they don't want to take good care of themselves. So rather than taking better care of themselves, like would be the probably uh, the right thing to do, or the best thing to do, rather than just taking good care of themselves, they project onto the group, like we need to
everyone else should take care of
yeah,
themselves.
everyone should take care of me, and we
Collective.
have to when we have to force each other to take care of each other, rather than just like saying let's take better care of ourselves, which would actually solve uh, at least most of the world's problems. If everybody would just take care of themselves, that would solve at least like about half the world's problems. But people just don't want to do that, because then that's one of those things you can't say, because it's like, oh, you're just insensitive, and you're just whatever, you have
But
no
it opens the
empathy.
door to but it opens the door to exploitation if people aren't taking responsibility for themselves, because they can be
Right.
told all kinds of fantasy scenarios and take
Yeah, all
this
these
pill,
utopian
or,
things.
or do this or drink that or whatever, and they believe that that will uh, make them better.
Hmm.
But really, it's up to them. Like, I don't know, diet pills,
Right, right,
good
right.
example, right? Why don't you just eat less and exercise more? But
Well,
rather than do that, you trust it to someone else to come up with the solution. Really, I mean,
and
what it
diets
boils.
in general, and just pills in general, like that's another part of our feel good culture. It's like follow this program, and then you'll eternally have this problem solved, or take this pill and you'll eternally solve this problem. So it's like people will take a pill at night to go to bed, pill in the morning to wake up, and then um, another pill to like focus at work, another pill to, or maybe smoke weed or something to relax in the evening, and then drink and have caffeine and all these drugs to regulate their body, because they can't plug themselves into reality and do the thing that they want to do. And then they of course become dependent on that, and that becomes like another feedback loop that causes all kinds of other problems of the, you know, weird chemical society that we're living in, which is of course part of what was it, 1984, the book where
Yeah.
it's like everybody's just taking a happy pill and
No.
uh,
That's Brave New World.
yeah, Brave New World. Everybody's just got to take a happy pill, and if you're not taking the happy pill, then you're the enemy. And that's like where half the world is right now, whether it's some antidepressant or something else. It's just a feel good culture that everybody's just got to handle their feelings with shortcuts or handle their problems in life with shortcuts.
But what it leads to is this
Yeah.
herd
Yeah. The herd always
reassurance.
has
And
an answer.
everyone thinks it's okay to be like this. When your friends say, have another drink, and you really should say no.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
of course.
Or you just need to get laid.
Right.
Or whatever. When it's
You
like,
should smoke weed. I mean,
yeah.
a number of people who, in the young Facebook groups,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm not, people say I'm just, how do I sort out my problems or whatever. And then you get like 5 comments underneath saying, hey, weed.
Yeah. Just have a
in a
joint,
young,
man.
in a young group,
Yeah. Oh yeah. In the Carl Jung group. Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
thing with some of those groups. And the thing is, what that does is, whether it's a drink or it's like some other little thing, what it'll do is it just pushes your issues under the surface, and then eventually they come out. So it's just a matter of time, or they're just always kind of like right below the surface. Like,
I like a drink, and I don't like to smoke weed, but
yeah.
if people like to smoke weed, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. And
Yeah, I don't have a
these
problem with
drugs
it.
work.
Yeah, but it's like the best thing you can do really is either figure out what it is that is your responsibility, and then do it, because especially if you've been avoiding it, because that'll be the ultimate make you feel better, is do the thing you've been avoiding, or the thing you know to do that you've been afraid of, and just figure out a way to do it. Of course that takes courage, and people don't want to do that. They want to you know live in fear, like you said before. uh but then if you use chemicals, or you use whatever else, avoidance, just stare at your phone or whatever else, then you can avoid those things indefinitely.
And you look for, we talk about the herd.
Mm.
You look for affirmation from others,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you look for, so you might be afraid, and you will look for other people who are afraid.
Right.
You will join a group of people who
A fear group.
drink. Yeah, like a fear
Or,
group.
well, and
This
people
is
living in fear the same way.
this is Fight Club. This is like a key motif of Fight Club at the beginning.
Yeah.
When he goes to all those self-help groups.
Yeah.
Like testicular cancer.
Yeah.
Whatever else, like alcoholism,
Blood
or
parasites.
whatever.
Yeah.
And he has all these issues, right? He pretends, he imagines, well, he does pretend, doesn't he? He says, "Yeah, I have testicular cancer," or
Right.
whatever. Whichever group is on that day, he goes along and pretends to be sick, so he can be. It comforts him to be with other people who are afraid. Misery needs company, I think, is the expression.
Yeah. Well, and the way that started was he was having insomnia, which had its other issues, he found out later. And then I don't know, he said something about how horrible he had it. And he's like, oh, you know how bad this is, or whatever, doctor, because he wouldn't give him an Ambien prescription, I think. And he's like, oh, you want to see miserable? Go to the testicular cancer group here on Tuesday nights. And he's like, oh, okay. And although I think there is an ounce of truth in that, because I've always thought, especially now that there's not so the church did have a good influence in society when it was stronger. And now that we've lost that mostly, even though most people might say that they believe in God or they might say that they are this or that religion, we don't have that aspect of community of the church being involved and helping each other through their fears and through all that. And so people need an alternative if they insist on not getting it through the spiritual end. And sometimes you can find that in therapy, and sometimes you can find that in different groups. And so one alternative might be something like a 12-step group, but not necessarily you
Yeah,
have
but
to be an alcoholic.
that's also Jung's influence, right? And
Yeah,
and that's a group experience, and that's the
right,
point of it. The group experience is that
right.
this is how bad it can get. This is how it can go. We've all been really low, and
Mm-hmm.
now collectively we raise ourselves up again.
Right, right.
And I just don't. Yeah, I don't see. We need a kind of global 12 steps right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, something
Scale.
in the culture. And I mean, I hope that things are happening in the culture where, okay, so it's like talking to my brother-in-law when I was visiting a few days ago about just my group. But I realized, I don't know, I've probably said this before, but how a year ago when I started this Facebook group, and you started chiming in a little after that, but it was like nobody got it. Maybe my message wasn't clear, but in general, people didn't want to talk about these things at all last year because things were too good. It was like we were spoiled children, the whole world. But
Yeah.
now that we're kind of like making it on the other side of COVID, like during COVID, like March, April, maybe May, still people were just in like a craziness. But June, July, August, and in September, now people are like, okay, it's not the end of the world, but we need to get our heads together and start thinking about things like values and uh, living a better life and those kind of things that people didn't want to talk about last year. Last year just was
Mm-hmm.
like consumerism and feel goodism. This year, I think that people are starting to come out of that sort of like haze, and maybe that's part of what's going on with COVID that you brought up in this sort of herd denial was they want to stay in this like haze, this unconsciousness, but they can't. And so I don't know. It's hard to say what the percentage is, but a lot of people are like, okay, it sucks to be unconscious, and it sucks
Yeah,
to,
I think it's many more people than you
yeah,
realize.
yeah. It's like a culture
Obviously
shift.
go through these experiences and
Yeah, yeah.
get a bigger picture
Mm.
of the cosmos behind you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas the media is left behind, basically. I think
Yeah, yeah,
what you see in the media is like the dregs,
yeah,
basically from the way and also politics. It's really dregs of how of the society's ended up in the media somehow. The way articles are written, the way that there's no.
yeah,
We talked about this. I mean, the daily archetype
yeah,
and the logo you have behind you of
yeah,
is the sun and the moon. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the classic idea that there's two sides to every coin, right? That's
Right.
everyone knows that,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you read an article uh, and it only presents one side of the coin
Right.
to all the people who only want to see one side of the coin, right? But there's almost everyone you talk to isn't really like that. They're hard of it. They see that there's upsides and downsides to everything, and we feel it innately. That
Yeah. Well, it's strange too, because if you say like, if you write an article or you go on the media or whatever, and if you're just trying to be one-sided about it, or you're like, Trump is the devil and whatever else, or everybody's dying, it's the end of the world, whatever you do, the reader, if they're not just like a dumb, impressionable, want to be pushed around by the herd media, then they're going to automatically be like, what about the other side? You
Mhm.
know, so I don't know. I feel like there's
And
this.
there's a lot of people who just ignore the media. Yeah.
Yeah, well, on one hand, ignore,
This,
but on the other hand, also just are like whatever the media says is probably a lie, or at least they're very skeptical of the mass media now.
but there's people on the extreme
Mm,
who have the loudest voices,
yeah,
and they're the most afraid people
yeah,
usually on the extreme, and they very aggressively shout people down and troll people on the internet. But I don't think that that's typical of daily life.
right,
I
right.
wouldn't say. So if you talk to your neighbor or whatever,
Mm,
they might be incensed on Facebook, but they wouldn't look you in the eye and say that stuff. And they wouldn't say it
yeah,
themselves. And this is also something you see in the news or
mm,
in articles. It's like such and such said this, and such is outraged
yeah,
by this. The author of the article has no agency
yeah,
whatsoever
yeah, yeah,
because they're quoting someone who's outraged, and it
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
matter if that person has legitimacy or not,
right.
really. Like one person
It's
says
just
they're
amplifying
outraged, and,
drama.
and they're speaking for everyone,
Yeah,
and then you get someone who takes that article and then shares it on Facebook,
right,
and what the they're amplifying the amplification,
right.
Whereas what one person allegedly, or one person said something about something, and you with that person, and the journalist agrees with what the person said or wants to put that spin on whatever happened,
Mm,
and then the person sharing it on Facebook doesn't even offer their own opinion. They
yeah,
just post it and say this is the truth because it's in this newspaper and it has a quote from this person, and it's just like third or fourth hand information, and there's no
yeah. Well, like I think
truth
maybe
to it.
one of the best examples now is just this silly mask world or mask whatever is going on.
Mask debate.
Yeah, the
That's
mask debate, where it's like I can post any article or any like thing or just like a few words saying something doubting mask, or even if what would really enrage people is if I posted the CDC video back in I think March, where they're like, there is no evidence that mask will help prevent the spread of coronavirus. You should only wear a mask if you're caring for someone or if you're already displaying your own symptoms. And then people are like, no, you can't say that. They changed their mind, or more evidence came out, or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah, there was a clamor for science. There was a clamor for something that no evidence for because it looks
mm,
good to wear a mask.
yeah, it's like a huge virtue signal. I think that the governor of California, where I'm at, or him or his team put out a tweet a few days ago that said, okay, if you're gonna be out at restaurants, because we're just now barely having indoor dining again, just make sure you're putting on your mask between each bite.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So it's like, which is like the dumbest thing, because you're gonna be, unless you're like some barbarian, you're going to be chewing your food with your mouth closed, So if there's going to be a spread of germs or whatever,
Yeah,
it's only going to
but
happen while you're putting food in and out of your mouth or whatever.
at what point do you say then that it's virtue signaling, right? And then
Yeah.
if it's virtue signaling, then it's not actual virtue, and it's just a signal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the it's not it's a completely abstracted idea, right? It's abstracted from the reality of
Yeah.
whether to wear a mask or not, and it's just a purely symbolic, right? So you're
Yeah.
wearing a mask to show your. It's as symbolic as
Yeah. And
taking a knee, or
right. Yeah, exactly.
one of these, or waving the flags, putting the flag in your on your
And
porch.
the thing is too, is
That's,
that I, even though I don't completely agree with it, in order to be respectful of people who are in fear for whatever reason, legitimate or illegitimate, I'll usually wear a mask in public, and all that. Although I feel like the fair compromise is, and I know a lot of people do their own virtue signaling or trash talking if you don't put it over your nose fully, but I think that's a fair compromise because your nose is a natural filter of the germs and things going in and out. So I won't always put over my whole nose. But anyway, when I'm talking to these people, I won't mention that usually, but I will say the mask debate isn't even about the mask or the science. We can all agree that, okay, let's at least mostly wear a mask, mostly in public, out of respect for each other, whatever. But the mask debate is the debate of, if it's okay to be mandated what to buy and put on our bodies. So it'd be a totally different thing if the government and the CDC or WHO or whoever else comes out and says, we strongly recommend this, please be responsible. Totally a million percent different, because then it's putting the responsibility on each individual, saying, here's their opinions and their science and their best recommendations, and now the responsibility is on the individual. So then if an individual then is irresponsible and spreads the virus, that individual is then the one at fault. But now if it's being mandated on us by the government, then whatever happens, the government's at fault, and then it's our responsibility to sue the government. And then it's like, at what point do we are we okay with giving away more and more rights, or just saying more and more that the government can mandate by whatever loosely jargon science, buy this and put it on your body? So
Where's the agency? Where's the
yeah,
agency?
yeah, it's all in this weird sort of like unconscious virtue signal, pick a side, and
But it's all people are not conscious of doing this stuff.
right.
You can't call them out on it because they don't. Those people do not understand what they're doing.
Mm.
That they do not understand their fear is in their heads,
Right,
and it's not a collective fear, right? They can't speak for everyone.
Mm.
People think because it's on the news, because someone else said this, because someone else shared it on Facebook.
Someone with a lab coat.
Yeah, they like to think that they can speak for the whole of humanity, and that's very dangerous. I think people are gathering evidence that what they say is the same, the way that everyone should think and does think. Deep down, they should, if they weren't so stupid.
Because on a personal level, if a person is worried about themselves, maybe because they have a pre-existing condition, or someone in their family has a like pre-existing condition, I can understand that. But for almost 100% or as much as possible, if you're just personally careful with those people who have those maybe higher risk for their age or whatever the case is, then you're fine. But that's not the issue. The issue is it's pushing their own perceived morality on other people. It's almost like a new type of church and state, where it's like, my morality is you need to not only not kill my grandma because of course she's okay because I have like isolated her or whatever, but you need to not kill any grandmas no matter how isolated they are. And so I'm putting my non-grandma killing morality on you, and I'm going to force it and give you $100 fine if you're out in public without a mask. And it's just another version of forced morality.
It doesn't make sense. Can't get my head around it. It doesn't make sense. And it's but I mean, the only way it makes sense for me is that it's unconscious. People they're not conscious of what they're doing.
Well, it has to do with and this is a lot of what Jung talked about too, is when, Jung and Nietzsche and Jordan Peterson, as he talks about them, and that when you take out our religious presuppositions, those urges and instincts and archetypes don't go away, and so they are replaced with ideologies. Just like I had known people and family members um, who got drunk and cried 4 years ago when Trump won the presidency, and that's not the way to behave unless you're looking at it as a religious institution.
Right.
You know, if it's just a government institution, especially the way that the president has such limited power, then it's just like maybe you're sad because certain laws may or may not affect you or whatever. But it's that you've deified this position and you have elevated it to such a point that it has become this religious figure,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then
And
you
then you're
think,
disappointed when the person doesn't live up to
yeah, and
that.
you think, oh no, now it's not a woman, it's this orange man, he bad, he the devil, and it's just not uh anything in conscious reality. It's just this what it's this religious mindset that people get in, and they deny it. They
Hmm.
deny it so fervently that they're in this religious behavior, and they hate it because it's like anytime like that's how I really get people riled up, whether I do it for out of boredom or not, is tell people that they're behaving religiously when they're just having a political debate or whatever.
Hmm.
And so they do the same thing if they catch themselves behaving religiously, then it riles themselves up because
Why
people
do
don't
I
want to do
care?
that. Yeah, people don't want to do that unless that they consciously know that they're doing it, but they're doing it unconsciously, like you just said.
Yeah, we see it. We see it in the daily archetype.
Yeah.
The group times.
Yeah.
If we, you can't. I think we talked about this behind the scenes. You
Mm.
really argue with people.
Right.
There's no point. If you argue, then they'll say, "Hey, you're arguing,
Yeah.
so you must be representing the opposite to me,"
Right.
which means it's worth having an argument somehow.
Right.
Makes sense, right? If there's an opposite to my position, then my argument must be different.
Yeah.
But if someone's like, whatever, I don't care about what your opinion on this trivial issue, and it's of no consequence to me, because there are greater archetypal forces at work than
Right.
this bullshit.
Yeah.
And basically, that leaves you with the trickster archetype, right?
Yep.
And you play that very well.
Yeah.
On the daily archetype, and that's why there aren't really big arguments, because people who go off on the extreme, they make fools of themselves.
Right.
And in a forum like the daily archetype, or there's not that many, then these kind of arguments just someone says something, you can post a gif of the Joker or whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, that's me.
That's me.
That's the role I'm playing here.
Yeah.
I'm playing the Joker, or I'm Batman, or whatever.
Well, and
Could
it's
be
because
anything.
people are so used to the fact in like most groups, if that happens, then, and if there's an admin or a moderator or someone tries to come in and say something or get involved, then it's going to be like, I'm laying down the law. And then it's like, oh, if the admin or the moderator is laying down the law in a Facebook group, then I'm going to make a big drama of it. Whereas I'll usually, I'll just go in and like be like, yeah, you're projecting, and here's some gifs or whatever, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go get some
Just go
tacos.
away.
I'm gonna go away. Bye.
And that really works,
Yeah.
because like, if you've got nothing insightful or funny to say, then what are you adding to the conversation apart from ratcheting up the hysteria? And we're not here to be hysterical.
Yeah.
There's no value in that.
So
I mean, there is if you're a someone
if you
who's
just want the
self-right.
drama, some people just want the
If,
drama, and
if you want to feel self-righteous and feel justified in your existence, then of course
yeah,
go on Facebook and pick a fight.
yeah, yeah,
Fine.
yeah. And yeah, there's definitely some trolls. I haven't had I've only had one or two trolls that came and went in
Yeah.
my group, and there's some in some other groups that I go in off and on for fun. And I think after a while, if after a couple troll gifs and whatever else, troll comments, and she's like, yeah, I guess I'm just being a troll. So
Right.
because a lot of times they
But
don't realize they're being trolls. You know, they're like, I'm standing up for justice and equality and humankind, and then you're like, yeah, you're just being a troll.
yeah. So what is justice? Define
Yeah,
justice. Like,
yeah.
okay. Well,
You're being unjust with your drama right now, or unjust. So
so this is like the
what?
hero trickster archetype that we're kind of practicing playing that, and I'm reading my book, and you're
Oh yeah,
doing your
yeah.
group.
So,
I
yeah.
think
So
that's
tell us about what's going on with your book and everything.
well. Started off as like a personal journey about you know a bad marriage and getting out of the marriage. So,
Mm-hmm.
but you could say that's kind of archetypal for the situation we're in now.
Mm.
On a global scale, we're in a bad marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
How are we going to get out of it? Whatever. And, yeah, a chance encounter with a young lady,
Mm-hmm.
and that set off this kind of should I stay or should I go psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
Then I won my wife back, and then we had an argument, and then and then at that point, so many archetypal strange things happened to me that I decided
Mm-hmm.
to. I'd already started writing a book, and I went off to the countryside. Lived like a hermit with a friend. He was also writing. He also wanted to write.
When was this that you were being a hermit?
This was in 2018. It started,
Okay.
and but then as I went along, I realized how many archetypal, hilarious or
Yeah, yeah.
entertaining stories happened along the way where something bad happened and something good came out of it, or something good
Mm-hmm.
happened and it was too good
Mm-hmm.
to be true,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of thing. This cycle of ups and downs, and then I actually kind of started noticing that people were not thinking I was crazy, um, but thinking it was unhealthy. My lifestyle became
Mm.
insomniac. Became hyper, and then I would go, be
Yeah, yeah.
introspective for a while, and then I would kind of drink or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever, not heavily, just to keep myself on a level to some degree.
Yeah, yeah.
And then as I started writing and I started sharing with people, and I realized it was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I got through the tough times was with your group and
Mm-hmm.
some other groups, like really trying to explore these concepts with other people in dialogue, because it's helpful to a point to read Jung or Nietzsche or whatever,
Yeah.
but the lived experience, the conversation, the community
Right. Connecting with real
is
people.
connecting with real people is like is a really important part of life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And being on a yoga mat and meditating is not really
Yeah.
the full experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as I went along, and the writing process gave me agency,
Mm-hmm.
and I started doing things to be able to write them down.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the idea of you write your own
Mm-hmm.
obituary at your funeral, or you write your own legacy, like I mentioned, David Bowie or Prince or whatever.
Yeah.
When they die, people know what they've done,
You're right.
and
Right.
that's a big deal, right? And you don't die in an anonymous way, and
Right.
and and then this whole COVID stuff started happening, and I just saw that people are really, really
Yeah.
lost. They're really,
Well,
really can't think for themselves. And this is like, wow.
what's
And I
strange is
realized
that
that,
it's these layers of reality, and so just uncovered that they were usually able to act like everything was together, but it showed that they were lost. Where like last year, it looks like everybody was cool and had it together, and now we just know that it just took everybody getting the cold to
right,
realize how lost people are.
and you kind of called it at the beginning, and we talked about it,
Mm.
in whenever April or whenever.
Mm.
The kind of psychological impact of this is going to be it's going to be very, very unpredictable.
Right. The
And
ultimate unknown.
and I actually realized that through my writing,
Mm.
because I've been done various things before, like journalism and stuff like this, and copywriting.
Yeah.
That you actually manipulate people's thinking.
Right.
In a positive way, like as you do on the daily art.
Yeah.
You can really uplift people without being preachy.
Right.
By appealing to their emotions in a positive way,
Mm-hmm.
appealing to inspiring them, and that you can actually do this without being a dick about it.
Yeah.
Without looking down on people.
Yeah. And you almost have to nowadays too.
That's a pretty heroic and courageous.
Yeah.
Which I've gone the whole book without using that word.
Yeah.
It's actually my name.
Yeah.
My family name. So try and use the words like bold or whatever.
Okay. If you gotta use it, you gotta use it.
I mean, to actually write stuff down that you've been through in a really honest way like that does take a lot. It takes a lot out of you.
It does take a lot of courage.
Yeah, don't use that word. No.
Okay.
It does take you on ups and downs. It does take you, and to share it with other people is really a struggle. I'm nearly there now, but I kind of had to look very deep into this idea of the herd.
Yeah, that's a big one.
What it means to be outside the herd, which I think Nietzsche really struggled with, and Zarathustra. That's the main theme of it. And obviously, you can read it as a good story or allegory, but I think most people read it as like, oh shit, I'm part of the herd.
Yeah.
Well,
usually
read it.
Usually the people who are in the herd deny it. They're like, "Oh no, you're in the herd. I'm not in the herd."
But the first step is to realize that you're in the herd, right?
Right.
Then
most people will never do that.
That's the easy part, right?
It's easy. Might be easy for you and me, but from the people that are in it, it's like pulling a tooth with no anesthesia for them to realize it or admit it.
Well, it's still the easy part compared to
the journey that's ahead. Yeah.
That's the base.
That's a whole other adventure of like pulling out all the other teeth and all the bones and what. But I don't know. It's like I don't know if I can draw on that analogy anymore. But it's like at a certain point, you get so, because what it is, it's a conflict / pain avoidance that keeps people in that sort of unconscious state. But then the more that you confront the conflict and the pain, especially if you can do it in, I don't know if I want to say smart ways or just like the right ways, but the more you can confront conflict and pain and build wisdom with it, the more it makes you strong and courageous and all those other things that we need to be. But you can't. But avoiding it just makes you more and more weak and needing the herd.
yeah. But I mean, my story is not
Mm,
particularly dramatic. You know, it's like
yeah,
it's not like I did amazing stuff. You know?
yeah, yeah. It's just well,
It's just
in a way though, it's amazing to let people look under the hood, you know, because most people will keep that sealed until until they die. Yeah,
well, and most people will judge others. You know?
yeah,
Like most people are watching the movie. Let's put it that way,
right, right. They don't
and
want to
not
participate.
they're not starting the movie.
Yeah, they'll
And
do anything to not be.
when you're watching the movie, it's basically a projection, and you see
Right,
yourself in all the characters, and
right.
you see the meaning of life
Mm.
projected before you
And
in
then
a film, and
what ends up
that's why you
happening in
cry.
reality is you either end up being uh probably a not great role or one that you wouldn't pick in somebody else's drama or movie or reality or whatever, or you end up just being, because you didn't take control of your own drama or whatever you want to call it, reality. uh Maybe it's not somebody else's, it's your own, but because you're just trying to be an observer rather than a participant, it's a tragic one instead of instead of a heroic one. You know, it's going to go horribly to just try to be a observer rather than a participant.
Well,
And
it's a what's the word? Denial of responsibility or
right,
rejection of responsibility when you say it's just entertainment, it's just fun,
right,
uh,
anything to escape.
and you deny yourself learning, like you deny
Mm-hmm.
yourself development, and I don't know. I just don't want to preach about that
No,
too
it's okay.
much
It's
because,
just
uh,
reality.
well, in my book, I don't want to. I don't want. I want it to
Oh,
be kind of a feel good thing
okay, okay.
while exposing these things.
Yeah, do it
I
unconsciously.
realized, I realized, yeah, you can play with people's unconscious. You can take shadow. You can,
Mm-hmm.
you can present both sides of the argument at the same time. You know, Nietzsche did that a lot with the aphorisms or Confucius or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like bringing together the opposites
Right.
is a really seductive uh, thing
Mm-hmm.
and really fun
Mm-hmm.
because you can say all kinds of things with the person understanding what you mean,
Mm-hmm.
but questioning whether you really meant it. You know what I mean? So it's up to them how they interpret what you've said.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you know, film the director knows exactly when the audience is going to cry or
Right.
laugh, or a comedian knows exactly, or a magician, illusionist knows exactly how the audience is going to react, right?
Right.
Because they present them with something that is it has an inherent contradiction in it,
Well, and
which
that's why
makes it,
people are always drawn to good movies is compared to you know, if they go to something like church, they will usually either tune it out if they go or they just won't go. And and there's of course a place for that. But they will go to movies in, you know, almost everybody on a regular basis because it does the same thing as preaching but in an unconscious way. So
right.
you act like you're just entertained, but then unconsciously you've projected out all these pieces of your unconscious and your psyche, and then they come together at the end, and then you feel like you need to be heroic and confront life, you know, which is the same
Or
thing that a preaching should do.
right, or a horror film is like talking to your shadow, saying, "Well, at least you don't have this bad. At least it's not as bad as your life isn't so."
Mm.
And then you can go back to your mediocre life and say,
Yeah,
"Well, that didn't happen," kind
yeah.
of thing.
I mean,
You can be inspired upwards, you can be dragged downwards, and both can be a positive experience because you want to be shown the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with movies, so most movies have some element of the hero's journey to them, but the ones that don't, along maybe the horror genre, or sometimes when they're like people having relationships with animals and some of these different things, or people in the wild, what it will be doing is it will be exploring people. It will be exploring people being attached or detached from their instincts and unconscious. So
Hmm.
a horror type movie, or some of these movies where somebody's out in nature, uh, which are rare. Most of them aren't that variety. But what it does, and that's why actually I think movies like movies are starting to get better at this, like the newer Jordan Peele movies. I don't know if you saw Us, or what was the other one by Jordan Peele? Uh, Get Out.
I barely watch movies, to be honest.
Okay, okay. but
One of
uh
those.
but they're getting better at this, where they'll explore this idea of we're out of touch with our instincts, or we can be manipulated by our unconscious, and how to at least start to reattach them, or at least show that's what's going on, instead of just like, here's a bunch of scary stuff. You know? So yeah, but it kind of has the same effect in different ways, which is inspiring people to uh, hopefully do something with themselves and confront life, instead of just always avoiding it. But that's always the thing, is with these entertaining things, we can learn from them and then apply it to life, or we can use whatever entertainment to just avoid life indefinitely.
Well, and this is the fascination with news as well, because it's so much driven by our emotional response to the issue of the day. So
Mhm.
in the sense of what did the George Floyd, remember him?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
George Floyd, um, the George Floyd murder, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it was tragic and
Yeah.
unnecessary, but it was used as a symbol of something way bigger,
Mhm.
and it was used, well, not used, but people immediately understood it as like the archetypal suffering of the black man,
Yeah, yeah.
the systematically racist
Mhm.
US.
Mhm.
And it was, yeah, it's and symbolic of, cops are bad, uh,
Or
and
authority.
defund the police was the result of it. And but no one questioned, like, is government bad, right?
Right, right,
No
right.
one no one questioned the role of government. It was the police force is systemically
Or just white
racist,
people,
and
or
and
white
and
males, cisgender especially.
and and black people are oppressed.
Yeah, they're the
You can
victims.
you can argue about the nuts and bolts of it, right? But this is all like, I mean, we could probably map it onto some film scenario, right?
Mhm.
Where these are uh, symbolic events and symbolic
Right, 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 right.
figures that you could maybe, that might, the same story, it might appear in a dream where you
Yeah, yeah,
imagine yourself as the victim,
yeah,
or you imagine yourself as the policeman,
yeah, yeah.
or you're Freud.
Well,
That the Joker has this kind of motif in it where
mhm.
the victim becomes the hero, or you know
Uh,
these things are, they're all archetypal, and this is why
mhm,
we talk about it, because the events in the news are archetypal,
mhm.
and the response to them is archetypal.
Um,
The herd response, or the
mhm.
outrage, is archetypal of, let's say, maybe like the flood motif is an
Yeah.
archetype, or the plague was,
Mhm.
there's a reason, and then here we have a plague.
What it does is very straightforward, and I know Jung talked about it. It was in the Undiscovered Self that I put on the podcast last week, and others have talked about it. But it's very straightforward that our most vulnerable point that you can put on anybody is this thing of, and racism is so it's such a weird phenomena because um I mean it just purely represents what is it?
Well, the example I like to
Mm,
use is Tom and Jerry, right?
yeah.
You have the mouse, and the mouse is the cheeky little mouse. Like, take it away from the idea of,
Yeah.
racism, black and white or
Yeah.
whatever. But you have the cheeky little mouse.
Mm,
You feel sorry for the mouse, and mouse is a kind of hero figure. But also, you kind of understand the irritation that
the
Tom, the
cat's going
cat,
through.
feels,
Yeah.
and that Tom's just doing his
Yeah.
cat duty, right? That's
It's
what
just
the
being a
cat
cat.
does,
Yeah.
chasing the mouse.
Mm,
I mean, can't blame the cat for that. And
mm,
then you have, so you have a good and evil struggle between Tom and
mm,
Jerry's the good guy, right? And then,
yeah.
but then you have the cat is afraid of the dog, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
dog in the story as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And then in that scenario, the cat is, you feel sorry for the cat, and the dog is fierce.
Yeah.
And then the layer above the dog, you have the mother, right? Or the housewife or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You only see her feet, right, in Tom and Jerry. And then
Mm,
she scolds the dog, and then you feel sorry for the dog.
yeah. Yeah.
And you can have this chain of victimhood,
Mm.
uh, or chain of like
Yeah, then the man
hierarchy.
gets home and scolds the woman. He feels sorry for the woman.
Yeah, right.
Can go on
Yeah, and
forever.
you can flip these things back and forth all the time, and that's the
Mm.
flip of that's the incision where you kind of, Tom is quite annoying. Like,
Yeah.
if Tom was your little brother, you probably beat him up, wouldn't you?
Oh, is that the mouse? I forget
The
now.
mouse. Yeah. No, sorry, Jerry's the mouse. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
mixing up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and
he's
it's
pretty
all
annoying.
funny, and
He's asking for it.
kids watch it, and it's funny
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they
For like
empathize
50,
all
60
the
years or
parties.
more. Yeah.
And if you start taking sides in Tom and Jerry, he's feeling a little bit ridiculous once you reach a certain age,
Yeah.
because this is what happens in reality. The cat chases
Yeah.
the mouse.
So it's like this thing of it's like a drama of opposites that goes on indefinitely, but in our sort of like innate psyche, the thing of I don't know, it's weird because we've always dealt with things of tribalism and things like racism in its weird forms for thousands of years, and slavery for at least back to most of recorded history, and trying to overcome that. And so I feel like we've always been trying to get to this place in consciousness where we're like, oh yeah, like even the story of the Israelites in the Bible, a lot of it was about freeing slaves, and that part of the story, and there may be some arguments of the timeline and things, but still the Egyptian slaves, you could say, that were from about 3,000 years, maybe 4 or 5,000 years ago, in some cases back to even Mesopotamia. There was always this thing of they're slaves, and then oh yeah, we realize, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then it's like this constant cycle of trying to overcome that. And so to call someone racist, or to see racism in yourself, especially if it's related to anything slave related, it's just the lowest point you can push someone. It's like calling someone like a puppy killer, baby puncher,
Yeah, right. Right,
pooping on everybody's grandma, whatever. But in a weird, so like I couldn't call you a puppy killer, baby puncher pooping on grandmas, because that wouldn't make sense. But at the same time, to call you a racist doesn't exactly make sense either, especially because technically a racist,
right.
Well, because technically a racist even is someone who believes their race is superior based on biology, which was something very popular in the early 20th century, but now almost, I mean, it's a very fringe amount of people or group of people that believe that, but it's very rare. So most of what we deal with now is culturalism, but to call someone racist, especially if it's somehow related to slavery, it's just the lowest thing, the lowest jab you can take, or like the most below the belt thing you can do. And because it's, you can't really put your finger on it, like, yeah, I owned a slave, or somebody owned a slave, or I definitely killed a black person on purpose, or I wanted somebody else to do that. It's just this mysterious unconscious drama that uh it's,
Right.
you
But
can't
then,
have a
but then,
rational conversation about it.
because what you have, let's say, in the whatever century, the herd, right,
Uh-huh.
was in a different
Yeah.
place, right?
Right.
The herd at that time was accepting of, war,
Right.
eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Slavery is fine.
Right.
People were racist because they talked themselves into looking down on black people or others, and 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 the herd at that time thought it was completely okay, and they built statues to their heroes who represented them.
Right.
Right. So, and then of course now the herd has moved on,
Mm-hmm.
and the herd at any given time is always. They always think that the 17th century herd or the 18th century herd always thought their opinions,
Right.
that what they believed was right. That's because they were the herd.
Right.
And then, but then, because the herd is more often than not wrong, because they tap into these realities, the higher truth. They just, even in religion, not typical that the herd doesn't really understand what's happening.
Right.
And but the herd is constantly changing and evolving and changing its position. And then you had the German herd, where the German people adopted, well, embraced Nazism, right? And at that time everyone thought that was right.
Yeah.
And then
It was,
when they,
it was like a new collective religion of the time.
and then when things, and they realized that this leads to catastrophic, death and destruction and pure evil, right? Then everyone has to come to terms with their collective guilt, of guilt for what the herd has done.
Right.
And at that point, everyone says, I wasn't part of the herd.
Yeah.
Right?
It was
Everyone
everybody else.
denies that they were in the herd.
Right.
So like, I see this with a lot of people, the prevailing wisdom during the COVID, the first wave was, yeah, we need to lock down and everything. And now, and everyone agreed on that. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people agreed. And now when it's looks like lockdown
the group
was
denial we're talking about.
counterproductive, didn't make sense, then people were like, yeah, that was stupid, wasn't it? And I never actually thought that.
Yeah.
And the herd went along with it, but I didn't. And this is like, yeah, so the herd is constantly morphing in its conviction and hubris that thinks it's absolutely about everything, right? And they know,
and
they know best.
there's always like a religious behavior that goes with it. And so it's like, sure, of course there can be real religion and religious experience that's authentic and life-changing and all positive things, but it has to happen on the individual level, because on the herd level it'll take all these weird mutated, defending itself at the cost of reality forms. And so that's what happened with all these huge movements. And Carl Jung talks about this several times, is how you can predict these movements that come about, because it'll show up in dreams, it'll show up in the unconscious, and it'll show up in the behavior of the herd. as these patterns that are being
But
played
it
out.
shows up in the news. You can see
Yeah,
what's coming corner if you really start to pay attention, because it's
yeah, yeah.
almost like it was bubbling up.
Right,
What's
right,
going to
right.
happen?
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of things that you could see all this wokeness coming before it happened. You could see, um, well, and we mentioned this the other day when we were setting this up, how um, I was talking to a friend about how Jordan Peterson might have been getting massively more popular in weird ways during this time that he hasn't been in the public at all. And a lot of the reason is because uh, everything that he sort of warned about during those couple years that he was out there, like saying the sky's gonna fall or whatever, and people are like, no, that's stupid, that's only for the Soviets back decades ago at least. Everything that he warned about is showing its ugly head this year. All the herd stuff and all the like people clamoring for utopia and clamoring for control and clamoring for giving up their liberties so that they can have uh security and everything else, as it's all happening this year. So
Right, amazing how it can all happen in 1 year as well.
yep, you just need everybody to get the flu or the cold or some kind of virus.
Right, and people really want this to happen. This was the frightening thing for me
Yeah.
to come to terms with, is that the herd gets such a head of steam up
Mm.
that it can be absolutely manipulated, or not even manipulated, but self-fulfilling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Self-fulfilling idea of fear as a virtue,
Right, right.
whatever else, just generates itself, and you end up could
Yeah,
end
well,
anywhere.
it goes into that group denial that the only way, so in this example of like the herd global group denial, the only way that you can excuse the uh overly fearful behavior of the past few months is by perpetuating it more. You can't come out and make a rational justification, or you can only to a very low degree or low
Yeah, because
resolution.
the fantasy has
Mm.
totally gone off the rails. It's
Right, right, right.
totally
So you have to
abstracted
build
now.
up a new fantasy.
Yeah, and that,
And
Isaac, is what I'm doing.
in
My own fantasy, my own story,
your
my own.
book.
But yeah, I mean, it's not. I made it up as I went along, right?
Okay.
So what kind of was a fantasy in a way,
Mm.
because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't. It's not like kind of is, but it's not doctored in. I haven't retrospectively written it, written
Mm-hmm.
what I wish would have happened,
Right, right, right.
which is a strange thing. Right? So it's kind of meta that I'm observing myself writing my story.
Yeah. All
Kind
these
of like,
layers of observation.
right, exactly. So yeah,
So are you going to put out a podcast or anything else? What do you think you might do over this next few weeks or months or year?
months. Well, I thought about doing a podcast which would be called something like Heroines, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and talking to people, because I've written a book about myself essentially, and I'm not sure I really want to talk about myself forever. But
You can still talk
everyone,
about courage.
yeah, I can talk
Don't
about
be
courage, but
ashamed.
I want to find it in ordinary people,
Yeah, 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 there you go.
or like find how they reached the point of, like, what archetypal events
Mm.
occurred in their lives that
Made them
maybe like a
authentically
relationship,
courageous.
yeah, like a relationship
Mm-hmm.
uh, with a brother, or something your father taught you, or you learned from your
Mm-hmm.
mother, or like how you maybe came to terms with something.
Right, right, right.
I don't know how you maybe achieved something.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty mundane, I guess. Maybe like maybe how did you arrive at the point where you started to, created Facebook group in the
Yeah.
community? What were those kind of turning points in your life that made you,
Yeah.
made you miss the daily archetype?
Yeah.
And you can probably look back in your life and say, yeah, that was quite a big turning point.
What's weird about it too, now that you're just kind of somewhat posing the question, is we normally think of it like it's going to be these sort of big events like this, like some big huge event will happen, or somebody will, like the way it's portrayed in movies usually, and somebody looks down at you with some dramatic look and says, oh, you got to get your life together. And then, okay, I'm getting my life together. Or somebody like says, or like there's some big thing, the daily archetype is the way to go.
Yeah.
But I think the way it usually happens in reality, that's more effective and real and everything else, is um just little steps toward the right direction and little steps away from maybe the wrong direction. um
Yeah.
which I guess is just kind of what happened, I think, with your book and with my group that became a podcast and everything else.
So what I think has certainly happened to me
Mm-hmm.
was that I had synchronicity events that I started noticing. Or the way I met this woman at the start, it was like a movie meeting. Like, when the college kid is walking along and a college girl comes and drops her books,
Yeah.
and they drop the books and they look at each other and it's like, oh, love at first sight or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's in a movie and it's staged, and but you have those events in your life where
Mm-hmm.
it couldn't have happened by accident.
Right.
And they're kind of archetypal events or something like that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's even Jung couldn't explain it. He talked about the collective
Mm-hmm.
unconscious and manifest synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
And, whatever, you can have your opinion on it, but
Yeah.
you talk to almost anyone and they will say nothing is
Mm-hmm.
by accident or everything happens for a reason. Because
Mm-hmm.
looking back retrospectively,
Mm-hmm.
the events of your life kind of nudged you in this direction. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you took the
Yeah.
care to pay attention to what's
Well,
happening,
and the thing is, it's
you
not
do.
all about necessarily the right direction, because a lot of times we what is but
A
it's
direction.
it's the direction, but it has to come from internally first, because a lot of times we think, oh, I'm just going to do this set of things, whatever that might be, go to school, get married, get in the military, or whatever else, and then that's going to be my thing. uh where I think the real authentic doing the best thing and all that, it comes from more of a uh somehow achieving maturity, and then doing things out of that maturity to gain more maturity. But it's
Right,
tricky.
right. And in the podcast, I try and get to the bottom of
Oh yeah.
what those events would be
Yeah.
in your life. Like, so, maybe everyone has a girlfriend or boyfriend that they fall in love
Mm-hmm.
with and then split up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really painful process. It take you 6 months to get over it, or more, right? And why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Those are in your life that completely mess you up.
Mm-hmm.
And why, right? What it's telling you is this is important, right? This love business is important. And you can either then say, okay, how can I find someone else? How can I fall in love again? Or be in a relationship with someone so amazing
Right.
again, or you can be scared off and say, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to ever feel that way
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people do that and they never want to
Right.
be in a
Well, because
relationship again.
like that's the thing with most people in relationships, that they go through the whole process of uh what it takes to go through those phases of relationships and hopefully work it out and live happily ever after. And that's so much work that if they have to get divorced or whatever else, a lot of times people say, I'm never getting married again or whatever. But I think what those people often don't realize until maybe later is what they were really going through is, but it was projected onto the other person, was
Right.
maturation. And so if they just go into the next relationship mature, then there will be some of that, but not so much of the painful stuff in the future.
Each relationship gets better and better until you can
Yeah.
be in a relationship with someone where there's no drama, right? Because you're not projecting each other.
Yeah. There'll be drama, but just not the false projection drama as much anyway.
Well,
Some of the
I
real
mean,
fun projection.
that's not really love anymore in the sense of the romantic head over heels type of love.
Yeah.
It's
Well, there will always be some projection, just not so much false projection, I guess.
well, at least you see maybe the next day you'll say, yeah, sorry, that was something else was bothering me and I took it out on you, whatever.
Yeah.
But
That's maturity.
But these things like can affect the rest of your life, right? That can affect other aspects. So maybe that would precipitate a change of career or inspire you to do something, or whatever.
Write a book or start a Facebook group or a podcast or
right.
Whatever.
Do something that takes a bit of balls.
Yeah.
Because you've been through, a tough breakup, or you've been through, the loss of your parent, or whatever. It could be something.
The normal things people go through, but you actually went through and survived it, and other people go through it too.
Yeah. So that's why. I want to do that because I don't want to talk. I don't want. The book is about me, but it's not really about me. I think it's about everyone.
Yeah.
So but it's a fun read. The people who've read it have read it in a couple of days. The first half of it. So it's not like self-help or hard work.
Oh yeah.
It's basically kind of archetypal fun vignettes. Little anecdotes and little synchronistic things that
exploring the shadow.
How could that be?
Exploring the unconscious.
Because there's so much under this that you don't even realize is there. So much magic under
so much
in
magic.
your own psyche, but you don't until you start paying attention to the world, because things you notice are the things that mean something to you.
Right.
Your unconscious is telling you that whatever happens only because you noticed it, and and you get a sense of synchronicity that that was meant to happen. But it's not synchronicity. It's your unconscious saying, hey, pay attention to that thing.
And because you paid attention, that's you coming to conscious and starting to come to maturity or growing up a bit.
And you can tell someone that event and they'll say, well, that's pretty surprising, but it's no big deal. Whereas at the time you were like wide-eyed and amazed and how could this happen?
Yeah, because it's something you usually try to ignore, but it happened to you and it caused suddenly illumination or the lights to go off.
And everyone has these experiences, the whole like being at one with the universe at the same time, as feeling like you're a tiny speck in the very center of it. These things happen to everyone, but people don't assign meaning to the events in their lives. They just like. So what happened to how are you doing? What happened this week? What happened to you? Oh, nothing much. Whatever. You can't go through your whole life saying nothing much to everyone. Ask you
I'm fine. It's fine.
Yeah, nothing special.
It's fine. Drinking coffee with the room on fire.
So yeah, do something, man. You know,
Yeah.
what happened to you today, and have something to say. You know, why not?
Right.
It's not like narcissistic or hubristic
Yeah.
or whatever. It's just like, so what happened today? What did you notice in the world
Mm.
today?
Yeah.
And only kids
Reflection.
do it as well. Like my kids, they didn't go to school for 6 months because of the COVID. And then first day they come home and you're like, okay, so how was school? What happened in school? Nothing.
Nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing ever happens to me. You know, make it happen.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right, man.
So does it seem like we're just gonna have to wait and see for all these things with you? There's nothing to define for Adrian Courage right now, other than hang out in the Daily Archetype and some other groups, or is there anything to find now? I think we're gonna wrap it
Well,
up
I'm
in a
nearly
minute.
I wrapped up a chapter again today
Mhm.
of the book. I was like doing obviously 42 chapters.
Wow.
I was 42 when it happened, and they were like 6 to 10 pages of A4. Like A4, I put it into Word.
Mm.
So there's not that much to do, and then I've got to go and pick through it with
Mm.
my editor.
Wow.
So who knows when it will be done? You know,
That's a book for you.
patience, but as long as it's done before I die, then that's the main thing.
All right.
No, it will be. I'm getting closer, but
Okay.
yeah, the thing is just to make some progress every day. Like you
Mm.
make some progress every day.
Mm.
You know, a few new members, and you
Yeah.
don't know where this is going or
Yeah.
downloads. Where's it going? Where's it heading? You don't know.
As long as it's going
Somewhere
something
upwards.
positive and not just destroying itself or destroying anything.
Right.
Something growth and bring maturity about.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up. But anything else you want to add? I guess we just have to be patient to get to your book and your podcast. But we'll have you on here again. And other than that, people should just find you in the Facebook groups or what?
Yeah, just no, I'm not famous just yet. No,
Not
I'm a
famous
nobody
yet.
at this time. But this, you know, you'll be lucky to know me once it's published.
Oh yeah. This is like before
Well,
there
you
were
might
stars.
exactly. Why not?
Before
Yeah.
Adrian Courage had his podcast and his book published, he did this podcast.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Why not? Why not
Why
think
not?
like that?
That's how I'm thinking right now.
And why not? Why not joke about it?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we're joking about it. Who knows? Nobody knows.
Well, if nothing else, you'll get your book out sometime in the next however many months or whatever, and you'll get your podcast out, and that's at least famous enough.
Exactly. I mean,
Exactly.
what more could you need?
Cool. All right. Anything else to add before we end it?
No, I'm also just wanted to say that
Mm.
like we need to encourage each other, and that's the name
Yeah,
of
for
the
sure.
thing. Unity and
Encourage. That means build each other up that we can have more courage.
right.
And
Build
enable
each
each
other
other.
up.
Yeah, enable each other to have more courage.
People aren't building it. People aren't building each other up. That's it.
Yeah, they're
thing,
helping.
right?
People usually help each other to be more weak when we need to help each other to be more strong and courageous.
That's it, brother.
Yeah, brother. Yeah. All right. Cool,
All right,
man.
man.
Glad
It's
we got to
fun.
do this. We'll do it again, and enjoy Budapest and all those things. And I'll see you around.
Keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thanks. Stay archetypal.